I preach this morning in the name of God, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So we continue to preach our way through the Bible using the story. And last week we looked at the tragic story of Israel's very first king. Israel rejected the Lord God as their leader, and they demanded to have a king just like every other nation. And even though God warned them what would happen, still they wouldn't listen. And so God listened to them. God gave them a king, Saul, who was everything they could ever ask for. He was tall, dark, and handsome. He was humble. He was successful. But Saul didn't listen to God either. Saul didn't trust God. Saul didn't fear God. And soon enough, Saul turned out to be exactly what the people asked for, which was a king just like any other. And that wasn't good enough for God or for his people. So God rejected Saul as king and swore to replace him with another. In the lower story, things have taken a turn for the worse. But in the upper story, God saw this coming all along. God planned for this long ago, bringing a faithful Moabite woman and a good Israelite man together, giving them a son, Obed, whose grandson, David, would be just the kind of king that God was looking for, a man after God's own heart. And David was a man after God's own heart, and we're looking at three ways today. First, David showed us the heart of a good shepherd. David shows us the heart of a good shepherd. You see, unlike Saul, David was not much to look at. I mean, even his own father overlooked him as the runt of the litter, not even bothering to call him in from the field when the prophet Samuel came to visit. Even his own father overlooked him, but God sees something in David that everybody else misses. God sees David's heart. Let's take a look. It's on the bottom of page 145. The bottom of page 145 in your copy of the story. The bottom of page 145. The Lord does not look at the things that people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And when the Lord looks at David, the Lord sees the heart of a good shepherd. The heart of a good shepherd who will fight tooth and nail for his sheep. Page 148 at the bottom. Page 148 at the bottom. David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it. I struck it, rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, and I struck it, and I killed it." And if that's what David will do for his father, if that's how David will fight for his sheep, then what will David do for his God? How will David fight for God's people? That's the kind of king God is looking for. Not just like any other king, type of king like Saul, but a king with the heart of a good shepherd who will fight tooth and nail for his sheep and lay down his life for them as he has to. A shepherd who will show God's fierce love and loyalty for the people. That's the kind of king that God is looking for. People look at outward appearances, but the Lord looks at the heart. And when the Lord looks at David, he sees a heart like his own. The heart of the good shepherd, who made them, who loves them, who wants them back, and who will do anything to rescue them. And pretty soon the opportunity comes for David to show his people just what that looks like. Opportunity comes knocking in the form of a man by the name of Goliath. And now Goliath was to the Philistines what Achilles was to the Greeks, what Hector was to the Trojans. Goliath was their champion. He was the best and the baddest of the warriors among them. And Goliath was all of that and even more. He was big. Top of page 147. Now a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. A cubit is the distance between your elbow and the tip of your middle finger. A span is a handbreadth. Now that's a different measurement for each and every one of us. But no matter who is doing the measuring, no matter how you measure it, that is one big guy. Over 7 feet tall, built like a tank, armed and armored like one too. Page 147. He had a bronze helmet on his head. He wore a coat of scale armor of bronze. On his legs were bronze greaves. A bronze javelin was slung upon his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. Do you remember back when the spies brought a bad report to Moses, saying, "There's no way we can conquer the promised land. We saw the Nephilim there. We're like grasshoppers to them." Well, Goliath is one of them. Goliath is one of the Nephilim. He is a giant, treacherous, terrifying giant of a man, single-handedly defying the armies of Israel and insulting the Lord their God. And as such, Goliath stands in our story today, like Pharaoh did a few weeks ago, as a picture, as a figure, as a type of Satan, who is powerful, who is frightening, who is aggressive, who is oppressive, who is filled with hatred, who is undeniably and unavoidably against us. And who is the Goliath in your life right now? What is the Goliath in your life right now? What is it that defies you and frightens you? What is it that defeats you and threatens to intimidate you, enslave you, and make you its own? Who or what is the Goliath, the giant in your life right now? Like the Israelites before us, who for 40 days were taunted and challenged by Goliath. Whoever or whatever it is probably something that's in your life right now and has already been in your life for some time now. Challenging you, defying you, taunting you day after day after day. It could be an old sin or failure that haunts you. It could be an unexpected fear or circumstance that has broken into your life. It could be the weight of one grievous misdeed or the accumulated weight of many that bends you down. But whatever it is, it has stepped in your life to challenge you, to intimidate you, to defy you, to undermine your confidence in yourself, and to rattle your faith in God. Who or what is the giant that has stepped into your life? And know this, that the only way to defeat that giant is to do what David did, and that is to stand in the name of the Lord, put on the armor of God, and put your faith and your trust in Him. Because that's the only way that the devil can ever be defeated. Not with sword, not with strength, not with persuasion, not with compromise, and certainly not by ignoring him and hoping he'll just simply go away. No, the only way that the devil can be defeated is to put your faith in what God has done for you and put your trust in what God will do through you to bring His upper story victory into your lower story need. For that's exactly what David did in that valley on that day. Page 149 in the middle. And David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and with spear and with javelin. But I come against you in the name of the Lord. And this day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down, and I will cut off your head. For the battle is the Lord's. The battle is the Lord's, and He will give you into our hands." And that's exactly what God did. God chose David as His champion, not because David was much to look at, but because when God looked at David, He saw a champion's heart. The heart of a good shepherd who will fight tooth and nail for his sheep and lay down his life for them. David is a man after God's own heart, and the first way he is that he shows us the heart of the good shepherd. The second is that he shows us the heart that waits on the Lord and trusts in Him, a heart that waits upon the Lord and trusts in Him. For you see, after that great victory over Goliath, after David delivered the Israelites from the Philistines, Saul became intensely and insanely jealous of him. And Saul maniacally and murderously sought to kill him again and again and again, until at last David was forced to flee for his very life into the desert, where David would spend the next 15 years. Open up with me to the timeline on the bottom of page 145. The timeline on the bottom of page 145. Samuel anointed David as king about the year 1025 BC. David became king about the year 1010 BC. That's 15 years. 15 years from the time that God anointed him as king until the time the people inaugurated him as king. 15 years, during which time David would run for his life like Jacob, live as a fugitive like Moses, be humbled and humiliated like Joseph, until at last the time came for God to lift him up and make him king. 15 years. When, like the Israelites in the wilderness, David had to learn the hard lesson of what it means to wait upon the Lord and to trust in him. But David learned that lesson, and he learned it well. Take a look at what he wrote on page 152, one of David's Psalms, page 152. Deliver me from my enemies, O God. Be my fortress against those who are attacking me. Deliver me from evildoers. Save me from those who are after my blood. And then about halfway down the page, you are my strength. I watch for you. You, God, are my fortress, my God, on whom I can rely. He learned to wait upon the Lord and to trust in him. You see, there are times in our lives when giants step into our lives to challenge us, giants sent by the devil, and those are times that call for decisive and courageous action. But there are other times in our lives when obstacles come into our lives sent by the Lord. And those are times that call for patience. Patience. David went through a season like that. I went through a season like that a couple years ago, 2015. The Lord sent me into the wilderness. I loved the life that he had given us in Columbus, Ohio. I loved the church that I was serving there in Upper Arlington Lutheran Church. I loved it. But the Lord firmly closed the door on my time there. It was time for me to go. And as I looked for a place to go, the Lord would shut doors in my face time and time and time again. And there I was, stuck in between in the wilderness with no place to go, no idea where the Lord was taking me. And there I remained in the wilderness for 6 months, waiting, trusting, praying day after day after day, until at last the Lord opened up a door and he brought me here. Have you ever been in a season of life like that? When there are obstacles in your way, when there are roadblocks in your path, and they are put there by the Lord. If so, then you need to do what David did. You need to wait on the Lord. You need to trust in him. And you need to pray with David. You are my strength. I watch for you. You, God, are my fortress, my God on whom I can rely, because you can rely on him. He brought David through. He brought me through. He will bring you through too. Wait on the Lord. Trust in him. That's what David shows us. A heart that waits on the Lord and trusts in him. And third and finally, David shows us a heart that loved the Lord and worships him. A heart that loves the Lord and worships him. And we hear it in this psalm that we just read by David. One of many psalms that David wrote. 73 of the 150 Psalms in the Bible, almost half of them were written by David himself. Clearly, he had a heart that loved the Lord and worshiped him. We hear that in the words that David wrote. We see that in the way that David worshiped, dancing before the Ark of the Covenant as they brought it into Jerusalem. This is in the middle of page 157. Now, when those who were carrying the Ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf, and wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all of his might, while he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and with the sound of trumpets. David had a heart that loved the Lord and worshipped him. We see that in the way that he danced, in the way that he lavishly offered sacrifice and praise to the Lord. And finally, we see that in David's desire to build a house for the Lord, to build a temple for the Lord, who had been such a fortress to him. Only God had other plans. Middle of page 159. Middle of page 159. I declare to you, David, that the Lord will build a house for you. When your days are over and you go to be with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, one of your own sons, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for me, and I will establish his throne forever. I will be his father, he will be my son, and I will never take my love away from him as I took it away from your predecessor. I will set him over my house and over my kingdom forever. His throne will be established forever. You see, God had other plans for David. and God made a covenant with him. Now, I remember what we said about covenants, that a covenant is a solemn promise spoken by God, sealed with a sign. Thus far in the story, we've come across 3 covenants. The first was through Noah with all the people on the face of the earth, never again to destroy the earth with a flood, and the sign is a rainbow. The second was with Abraham, to give him land, children, and a blessing. The sign was circumcision. The third was with Israel, to be their Lord, and they shall be his people, and the sign is the law, the 10 commandments. And now we come to a fourth, which is with David, to establish the throne of his kingdom forever. And the sign is a promised son, that one of his descendants, one of his sons, will sit on the throne before God forever. And this fourth covenant with David, this marks a turning point. A turning point in the story of the Bible, in both stories, the upper story and the lower story both. You see in the upper story, the God who made us, the God who loves us, the God who wants us back, has narrowed his focus to get us back yet again. First, God narrowed it through Abraham, and then through Isaac, and then through Jacob and his 12 sons, and then through one of those tribes of Jacob, the tribe of Judah, and then within the tribe of Judah, just through one of those families in the tribe of Judah, in the house of David, God has narrowed his focus yet again. So that the promise that God made to Abraham, to bless all the families of the earth through him and through his descendants, the promise God made to Abraham will now narrow and run through only one of Abraham's descendants, through David, and through his family forever. God has narrowed his focus through this one man in the upper story. And in the lower story, well, there will be no more guesswork about who will lead Israel from here on out. No more raising up a judge generation after generation, first from this tribe and then from that tribe and then from the other one. No, from here on out, it's only the tribe of Judah, and within the tribe of Judah, only the house of David, and that's it. In the lower story, the course of leadership for the nation of Israel has been set forever. But you see, that puts God at considerable risk. Because take a look again at what God said. Take a look again at the promise that God made on page 159, God's covenant. God said to David, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, and I will establish his throne forever. I will never take my love away from him as I took it away from your predecessor. I will set him over my house and over my kingdom forever, and his throne will be established forever. The promise that God makes here to David, just like the promise that God made earlier to Abraham, is an unconditional promise. It's one way, from God to man, from God to one man, that through this one man, God will bless all the families on the face of the earth. That God's plan to redeem all the families on the face of the earth will run right through this one man, David, and his family. And that's a risk. Because how's that going to work out for God? David may be a man after God's own heart. But what about his descendants throughout their generations forever? And David may be a man after God's own heart now, but not always, as we'll see when we pick up the story again next year in January. So how's that going to work out for God? To bind himself by covenant, to bind himself by oath, to bind the salvation of the entire world to this one man, David, and his descendants forever. How's that going to work out? Well, I'll give you a hint. We see a hint of it next week in December when we celebrate the birth of Jesus, who was David's promised son. But for now it's enough to know that God did choose David. For his own plan, for his own purpose, by his own grace, God did choose David. And God did call David a man after God's own heart. And David was a man after God's own heart. He showed us God's heart in 3 ways. First, David showed us the heart of the good shepherd. Second, David shows us a heart that waits on the Lord and trusts in him. And third, David shows us a heart that loves the Lord and worships him. That's what was in David's heart. What's in your heart today? Amen.